The winter wind moved through the canyons like a wounded animal, carrying sharp cold that cut through bone. Lone Hawk, an Apache warrior known for his quiet strength, guided his horse through the narrow pass. The sky was dark, and only a thin moonlight touched the red rocks around him. He was returning from scouting the outer lands, a duty he took seriously because danger often hid where silence lived. Tonight felt different, and he trusted his instincts more than any sign on the ground. As he neared a cluster of boulders, he pulled the reins and listened. The wind was strong, but something else moved with it. A faint sound reached him. Soft and trembling like a newborn animal, he frowned and leaned forward in his saddle, trying to catch it again. Then he heard it clearly. A thin cry that echoed through the canyon walls. It didn't match the sound of an animal. It was too human, too desperate. Lone Hawk placed a hand on his horse's neck to calm it and slowly moved toward the noise. Every step was careful, because he knew enemies sometimes used tricks to lure warriors into traps. Still, he couldn't pretend the cry wasn't real. No warrior of honor ignored the sound of suffering, even if it belonged to a stranger. He dismounted and tied his horse to a twisted juniper tree. The cry came again, weaker this time, almost swallowed by the wind. Lone Hawk followed it toward a small opening between two boulders. He crouched low and slid inside, entering a cold, shadowy cave. The deeper he went, the clearer the cry became, mixed now with soft, panicked whispers. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw her. A pale woman wrapped in a torn shawl sitting against the cave wall. Her hair was tangled from days of struggle, and her face looked pale from cold and fear. In her arms was a small newborn, wrapped in thin cloth that did little to fight the freezing air. The baby cried weakly, its tiny chest rising and falling with effort. The woman gasped when she saw the warrior. She pressed the baby closer and whispered, "Please don't hurt us." Her voice shook, and Lone Hawk saw the terror in her eyes. He didn't move closer right away. He knew his sudden presence in the dark cave must have frightened her. He raised both hands slightly to show he meant no harm. His voice was calm when he spoke. "I heard the cry." The woman swallowed hard, her eyes darting between him and the cave entrance. She looked like she had no strength left to run, even if she wanted to. The cold had already taken most of her energy. Lone Hawk stepped forward slowly. The baby let out a small cry that echoed through the cave. He noticed the child's skin was cold, and the cloth was damp from melted snow. The woman wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "My cabin was burned, and they chased me into the storm." Lone Hawk listened, without interrupting. He didn't know who she was or what danger followed her, but he understood one thing clearly. No woman carrying a newborn survived long alone in the winter wild. He saw her lips turning blue and her breaths were shallow. The baby's cries grew softer. As if the child was losing strength, he knelt a few feet away, giving her space so she wouldn't panic. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Mary," she whispered, tightening her hold on her child. Lone Hawk nodded and studied her for a moment. She was not his enemy, only a mother trying to keep her baby alive. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small deer hide, warm and soft. He set it on the ground near her instead of placing it in her hands. He didn't want to startle her again. "Wrap the baby," he said quietly. Mary hesitated, but when another cold gust entered the cave, she understood she had no choice. She reached for the hide and wrapped the child carefully. The baby's breathing steadied a little. Though it was still weak, Lone Hawk watched her closely. She was shaking from cold, hunger and fear. He knew if he left her here, she would not survive the night. The thought bothered him more than he expected. He stood up slowly and said, "You cannot stay here." Mary looked up, confused and frightened. "Where will we go?" she asked in a weak whisper. Lone Hawk didn't answer right away. He didn't yet know where he would take her, but he knew what he could not do. He could not walk away while a woman and her newborn froze in the dark. The warrior looked toward the cave entrance, then back at Mary and her child. He felt a pull inside him, something deeper than duty, something that told him this moment would change more than the night. "Come," he said finally, his voice firm but gentle. "I will help you." And for the first time since entering the canyon, he felt the cold night shift. not because the storm had lessened, but because he had made a choice that would change everything. The wind outside the cave grew louder as Lone Hawk helped Mary stand. She leaned against the cold wall for support. Her legs weak from days of fear and running, her baby whimpered under the warm deer hide. The sound soft but pressing. Lone Hawk studied her carefully, noticing how she struggled to keep her balance. She had the look of someone pushed far beyond her limits. He offered his arm, and she hesitated. Every story she had ever heard about Apache warriors flashed through her mind. She'd been taught to fear them, taught that they were merciless. But the man standing before her didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone deciding whether to save her life or disappear into the storm. Mary finally placed a shaky hand on his arm. Her touch was so light that he barely felt it. Still, Lone Hawk moved slowly, guiding her toward the cave entrance. The wind slapped across their faces when they stepped outside. Snowflakes stung Mary's skin, reminding her how close she had been to freezing. Lone Hawk helped her onto his horse, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She held her baby close, turning her face away from the wind. The warrior mounted behind her. Steadying her with one arm so she wouldn't fall, the horse began to move. Hooves crushing the fresh snow in a slow and careful rhythm. Mary felt the warmth of Lone Hawk's chest against her back, something that startled her at first. He kept scanning the cliffs around them, alert to anything unusual. Mary could feel the tension in his muscles as the horse climbed the rocky path. After a moment, she spoke softly. "Why are you helping us?" Lone Hawk didn't answer right away. He wasn't a man who explained himself easily. Finally, he said, "A child should not die in the cold." His voice was steady, but Mary sensed there was more behind his words. She wondered if he had lost someone before. Maybe a child, maybe a mother. Maybe someone he couldn't save? She didn't ask again. Sensing the silence he carried was heavy and old. They traveled between tall canyon walls that seemed ready to swallow them. Mary watched the shadows dance across the rocks. Every shape looked like a threat, a reminder of the outlaws who had chased her. "Do you think they are still looking for us?" She whispered, "Yes," Lone Hawk said simply. "Men like that don't stop." Mary shivered, but not from the cold. Fear settled over her like another layer of snow. She remembered the fire swallowing her cabin, the shouts, the gunshots, the smoke. She remembered running into the night with her newborn pressed against her chest. She hadn't known where she was going, only that she had to get away. Lone Hawk felt her tremble against him. "You are safe with me," he said quietly. Mary didn't know if she believed him, but she wanted to. For now, he was the only hope she had. And the baby sleeping against her chest needed more hope than she did. The wind softened as they entered a wide stretch of land. The moonlight showed the distant line of pine trees ahead. Mary wondered if they were going to his village. She had heard whispers of Apache camps hidden in the mountains, places outsiders never entered. "Where are you taking us?" she asked carefully. Lone Hawk guided the horse toward the trees. "Somewhere safe," he replied. Mary didn't know what that meant. Safe for him might not be safe for her. She clutched the baby tighter. Her breath shaking, Lone Hawk noticed and added, "I will not let anyone harm you." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Words like those were not spoken lightly by a warrior like him. Mary nodded slowly, even though fear still lingered in her chest. She didn't understand why he cared, but she could not deny that he did. They moved deeper into the forest. Branches brushed against Mary's shawl, leaving tiny drops of snow behind. The horse made soft crunching sounds in the frozen earth. The baby stirred, but did not cry, warmed by the deer hide in Mary's body. Lone Hawk felt a strange relief at the child's quiet breathing. He had seen death many times. He knew how fragile life could be, especially in winter. Saving this woman and her baby went against everything he had been raised to believe. She was white, from a world that had taken land, lives and peace from his people. Yet here she was, shaking in his arms, more vulnerable than any enemy. He tried to remind himself she should have been his enemy, but the thought didn't feel right. Some enemies wore hatred on their faces, but she wore fear, exhaustion, and a desperate need to protect her child. Lone Hawk respected anyone willing to fight that hard for another life, even if that person came from a world different from his own. They reached a small clearing where a fallen tree created a natural shelter from the wind. Lone Hawk slid down from the horse and helped her down. Mary's legs nearly gave out, but he caught her before she fell. "You need rest," he said. Mary nodded weakly, grateful, even though her fear still whispered inside her. Lone Hawk started a small fire with practiced hands. Mary sat near the flames, holding her baby close as the warmth grew. She looked at him in the firelight. She still didn't understand why he had chosen to help her, but she knew one thing clearly now. This warrior, who should have been her enemy, was the only reason she and her baby were still alive. And though she didn't say it out loud, she whispered a quiet thank you in her heart. Because sometimes survival came from the person you least expected. And sometimes the line between enemy and protector was much thinner than anyone believed. The small fire crackled softly as dawn crept over the horizon. Mary sat close to the warmth, her baby resting against her chest. The child slept more peacefully than the night before. But Lone Hawk could still hear the weakness in each breath. He knew time was not on their side. The cold morning air cut deep, reminding him that winter showed mercy to no one. Lone Hawk packed his things with quick, quiet movements. Mary watched him, unsure if she should speak. She still didn't understand where he planned to take her, or why he cared enough to risk helping her at all. But she noticed how carefully he checked the deer hide around her baby. He didn't speak, yet his actions told her everything she needed to know. When the fire died down, Lone Hawk lifted her onto the horse again. Mary held her child close and looked around the forest. The branches were heavy with frost, and the path ahead looked endless. "Are you sure we should keep moving?" she asked softly. Lone Hawk nodded once, his eyes scanning the tree line. "It is not safe to stay," he said. His voice was calm. But Mary sensed a quiet urgency behind it. She didn't argue, because she remembered the outlaws' faces. Remembered how they shouted when she ran into the night. If they were still out there, they would not stop until they found her. The thought tightened her chest. The horse walked slowly at first, careful on the icy ground. Mary leaned into Lone Hawk's steady presence. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of distant leaves made her tense. Lone Hawk felt her stiffness and said quietly, "You are safe for now." His words eased her slightly, but fear still clung to her like a shadow. They crossed the first ridge as sunlight touched the valley below. Lone Hawk paused, studying the open stretch of land ahead. It was dangerous to cross a place with no cover, but the mountains that sheltered his people lay beyond it. He weighed the risks and finally decided it was worth the chance. "We must go fast across this valley," he said. Mary swallowed hard, staring at the open space. "There is no place to hide," she whispered. Lone Hawk nodded. "That is why we go quickly." Mary tightened her grip around her baby. Praying silently, the warrior clicked his tongue, and the horse moved into a light trot. The cold wind bit at Mary's cheeks. She kept her head low, trusting Lone Hawk's judgment, even though fear twisted inside her. Halfway across the valley, Lone Hawk's sharp gaze caught movement on a distant ridge. He stiffened, his muscles tensing like a bowstring. Mary felt the change immediately. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Lone Hawk didn't answer right away. He watched the ridge for several long, breathless seconds. Then he guided the horse toward a cluster of large rocks at the far side of the valley. "We are not alone," he said quietly. Mary's heart began to race. "Is it them?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Lone Hawk didn't confirm or deny. He simply urged the horse forward faster. Keeping Mary and the baby close against him when they reached the rocks, he brought the horse to a halt and scanned the ridge again. No one appeared, but he didn't relax. "Stay down," he instructed Mary as he slid from the saddle. He crouched next to the rocks, studying the landscape with intense focus. Mary watched him, frightened but trusting. Minutes passed, long and tense. Finally, Lone Hawk returned to the horse. "We continue," he said, but slowly Mary nodded, her hands trembling as she held her child tighter. She didn't know how much danger followed them, but she understood that Lone Hawk was fighting it alone. They entered a narrow pass with tall stone walls on each side. The wind quieted, replaced by the sound of dripping ice. Mary spoke softly. "Do your people know we are coming?" Lone Hawk shook his head. "They do not expect outsiders," he said. She swallowed, wondering what that meant for her. "I don't want to bring trouble to your tribe," she whispered. Lone Hawk glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You and your child are not trouble," he said. The certainty in his voice surprised her. They continued deeper into the mountains. The path grew steeper and narrower. Mary held on to the saddle, her arms wrapped around her baby. Lone Hawk walked beside the horse now, guiding it carefully. He looked up often, watching for falling rocks or hidden dangers after a long climb. They reached a small plateau overlooking the forest below. Mary's breath caught at the sight. It was both beautiful and frightening. "How much farther?" she asked. "Exhausted, not far," Lone Hawk replied. Though his eyes showed concern, he knew his people would question his choice. Bringing an outsider into Apache land was rare, and bringing a white woman even rarer. Some would see it as betrayal, some would see it as danger. But he had made his decision the moment he heard the baby cry in the cave. As they moved toward the hidden valley where his people lived, Mary looked at Lone Hawk. She still didn't fully understand him, but she knew one thing clearly. He was willing to risk everything to protect her and her child. And as the mountains opened to reveal the place he called home, Mary realized that her journey with this warrior was only beginning. The land was hostile, the path uncertain, but she had been given something she thought she had lost forever, a chance to survive. And a stranger who refused to leave her behind. By midday, the mountains opened into a hidden valley filled with tall pines and soft winter mist. Mary leaned forward in the saddle, trying to see past the branches. Her baby shifted against her chest, warmed only by her body and the deer hide. Lone Hawk guided the horse down the narrow slope with calm confidence. He knew every rock and every shadow in this valley. Because this was Apache land, as they reached the bottom, Mary noticed faint trails that twisted between trees. Smoke rose gently from several places deeper in the valley. Her heart tightened with fear and uncertainty. "Your people are here," she whispered. Lone Hawk gave a slow nod, his eyes steady and unreadable. Mary swallowed. "What will they think of me?" she asked, her voice thin from worry. Lone Hawk did not lie or soften his words. "They will question," he said. "But questioning is not the same as harming." His tone was calm, but Mary could hear the unspoken truth behind it. The Apache did not welcome strangers, and they especially did not welcome white strangers. But Lone Hawk had made his choice long before they arrived here. He walked beside the horse now, his hand on the reins. His presence between her and the unseen camp felt like a shield she desperately needed. As they moved forward, the first few huts appeared through the trees. Smoke curled from small fires, and children's footsteps pattered in the snow. A group of young boys stopped in their tracks when they spotted Lone Hawk. Then they noticed Mary on the horse behind him. Their expressions changed instantly. Surprise, turning into confusion, then alarm. One boy dashed toward the main clearing without a word. Mary felt her stomach twist. "I don't want to cause trouble," she whispered again. Lone Hawk looked up at her. "You are here because I brought you," he said. "What trouble comes is mine, not yours." They reached the clearing moments later. Warriors emerged from different directions, forming a loose circle around them. Some held spears, some bows. All watching carefully, Lone Hawk stood tall. But Mary could see the tension building around them. Whispers spread like quick fire through dry grass. A woman stepped forward first. Her braided hair hung over a strong shoulder, and her eyes were sharp with suspicion. "Lone Hawk," she said, "you return with a stranger." Another man appeared beside her. Older, with broad shoulders and a long scar across his cheek. His voice was harder, a white woman. Here on Apache ground, Mary hugged her baby closer, her breath shaking. Lone Hawk did not move from his place beside her. "She needed help," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She carries a child who would have died in the cold." The older man narrowed his eyes, studying Mary as if she were a threat wrapped in rags. "She should not be here," the man growled. This is not her land, not her people. Lone Hawk lifted his chin. I know where we stand, he replied, and I know what honor demands. The camp grew quiet at his words. One of the elders approached slowly. Leaning on a carved wooden staff, her eyes were old, wise, and heavy with years of watching conflict shape the world. She looked at Mary first, then at the small bundle in her arms. The baby made a soft whimper. The elder's expression shifted. Just slightly, why did you bring her? The elder asked Lone Hawk. Lone Hawk kept his voice steady. Because no mother and child should die when I have the strength to prevent it. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gathering. Some nodded, others glared, unsure whether this act was compassion or foolishness. Mary tried to speak, her voice trembling. I mean no harm, she said softly. I only want my child to live. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a woman who had lost everything. The elder looked at her with a long, unreadable stare. Then she held out a hand slightly, as if testing Mary's truth. A young woman moved forward with a blanket and placed it gently around Mary's shoulders. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. Lone Hawk stood straighter at the small gesture. The elder spoke again. She may rest, but she is under your protection. Lone Hawk, her tone warned him that the decision carried consequences. Lone Hawk bowed his head respectfully. I accept that, he said without hesitation. Mary looked at him, surprised by how quickly he claimed responsibility for her. His people watched him, some disapproving, some curious. But none stepped closer. Lone Hawk guided Mary off the horse and steadied her as her weak legs touched the ground. Several women stepped forward to look at the baby. Their eyes softened when they saw the tiny, fragile form. One whispered, He breathes too softly. Another asked, How long has he been weak? Mary answered, as best as she could while tears filled her eyes. Lone Hawk placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. She is tired, he said to the others. She needs warmth and food. The women nodded and led Mary toward a warm hut near the fire pit. Mary looked back once, meeting Lone Hawk's eyes in that moment. She understood something clearly. He had not only brought her into his land, he had stood against his own people to keep her alive. And though the camp was filled with tension, though acceptance was far from certain, Mary felt a flicker of hope, because the first battle had been fought, and Lone Hawk had chosen her side even when no one else did. The warm hut smelled of pine smoke and crushed herbs. Mary stepped inside slowly, holding her child tightly against her chest. Two Apache women guided her toward a soft buffalo skin laid near the fire. The sudden heat against her frozen fingers almost brought tears to her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt the chance to breathe without fear of collapsing. The older woman, with the gentle eyes called Willow Mother, knelt beside her. She studied the baby with practiced calm, her hands warm and steady. Mary watched anxiously as Willow Mother placed her fingers against the infant's tiny chest. The baby's breaths were shallow, each one thin like it might fade away at any moment. Willow Mother looked up, her expression serious but not hopeless. He is weak, she said quietly, but not beyond saving. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Relief mixing with fear, she whispered, Please help him, her voice cracking under the weight of exhaustion. Willow Mother nodded and motioned for a young girl to bring a small clay bowl. The girl ran off quickly, her footsteps soft against the dirt floor. Outside the hut, Lone Hawk stood as a silent guard. Every passing warrior gave him a questioning look. Some stared with disapproval, others with open confusion. But none dared challenge him. His reputation as a skilled hunter and loyal protector was known throughout the tribe. One warrior approached him, a man named Running Wolf. He crossed his arms and said, You put yourself at risk by bringing her here. Lone Hawk did not look away. I put no one at risk. He replied, I saved a life. Running Wolf grunted. A white life, as if the words carried extra weight. Lone Hawk's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. Life is still life, he said, and the child is innocent. Running Wolf shook his head and stepped away. Others whispered near the fire, their voices too low to understand. But Lone Hawk felt the tension growing, like smoke rising before a storm, inside the hut. Willow Mother prepared a warm blend of crushed roots and boiled water. She dipped a small cloth into the mixture and used it to touch the baby's lips. The baby whimpered weakly, but accepted the warmth. Mary watched every movement, her heart trembling with hope and fear. Willow Mother said softly, "He must be warmed slowly, or his body will not accept the heat." Mary nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't found us," she whispered. Willow Mother glanced toward the doorway where Lone Hawk stood. "Lone Hawk follows his heart more than he admits," she said, then added, "It is both his strength and his burden." Mary thought about how he had risked the anger of his own people to bring her here. She still did not understand why he cared, but every time she looked at him, she saw a quiet determination that went beyond duty. He was a man who protected without asking for anything in return. A man who acted before doubting himself. Willow Mother placed warm stones wrapped in cloth around the baby. Mary leaned close, whispering soft comfort into her child's tiny ear. The firelight made her tired face glow with fragile hope. Willow Mother touched her shoulder gently. "You must rest too," she said, "or your strength will break." Mary shook her head. "I can't sleep while he's like this," she whispered. Willow Mother understood the stubborn love of a mother, so she set more herbs beside them and said, "Then at least drink." Mary took the cup with shaking hands and sipped, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Outside, Lone Hawk finally stepped into the hut. Mary looked up, her eyes heavy with worry. He knelt beside her, his large presence making the small space feel safer. "How is he?" Lone Hawk asked, looking at the baby. Mary's voice trembled. "Willow Mother says he can survive." Lone Hawk nodded, relief softening his usually stern face. He looked at Mary carefully, noticing how pale and tired she was. "You need rest," he said quietly. Mary's shoulders sagged, but she still shook her head. "He needs me awake," she whispered. Lone Hawk reached out and gently adjusted the deer hide around the baby. His fingers brushed the infant's small hand. The baby gave a faint, soft movement in response. Something in Lone Hawk's chest tightened at the sight. He had seen many children grow sick, but few had fought this hard to stay alive. Willow Mother watched him closely. "You have brought more than a mother and child," she said. "You have brought change." Lone Hawk looked at her, unsure what she meant. But Mary heard the words and felt a strange warmth in her heart. As night approached, the fire glowed brighter. Mary leaned her head back against the hut wall. Her baby's breathing had grown a little stronger, and for the first time since her cabin burned, she felt a sense of fragile safety. A safety built not by walls, but by one warrior who refused to leave her in the dark. Lone Hawk stayed by the fire through the night, watching over both mother and child. Every flicker of the flame reflected in his steady eyes. Every breath the baby took mattered to him more than he understood. And though the tribe whispered outside, inside this small hut, something unexpected had begun. A bond, a promise, and a child's faint heartbeat changing not just one life, but two worlds that were never meant to meet. Morning arrived with a pale sun pushing weak light through the mountain mist. Mary had barely slept, but her baby's breathing had grown stronger through the night. She opened her eyes to see Lone Hawk sitting near the fire. His back straight, his expression calm but watchful. He had not slept at all. He had stayed awake to guard her. And she felt a quiet gratitude she didn't know how to express. Willow Mother entered the hut with a bowl of warm broth. She gave it to Mary, nodding with approval when she saw the child's color returning. "He is still weak," Willow Mother said, "but now he has a chance." Mary held the baby closer. Whispering a soft thank you, Willow Mother smiled gently before stepping outside. Lone Hawk finally stood and stretched his tired muscles. "We must speak with the elders today," he said. Mary looked up sharply, fear rising inside her. "Will they make us leave?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lone Hawk shook his head slowly. "I will not allow it." But his words did not erase the truth she saw in his eyes. This choice he had made bringing her here had created more than simple questions. It had stirred deep tensions inside the tribe. He offered his hand to help her stand, and she took it without hesitation. Her legs were still weak, but she trusted his steady presence. Outside, the camp was alive with movement. Women stirred fires, children carried water, and warriors sharpened bows for the day's hunt. But when Mary stepped into the clearing, conversations fell quiet. Many eyes turned toward her. Some curious, some cold, some openly angry. She held her baby tighter and stayed close behind Lone Hawk. A group of warriors gathered near the elder fire pit. Running Wolf stood among them, his face set in a hard line. When Lone Hawk approached, the murmurs grew louder. The elders arrived last, walking with slow, steady steps. The oldest among them, Gray Bear, lifted his hand to silence the crowd. "Lone Hawk," Gray Bear said, "you have brought a stranger into our home." Lone Hawk bowed his head respectfully. But his voice remained strong. "She needed help," he said. "Her child was dying." Gray Bear nodded once, acknowledging the truth without showing approval. But another elder, Stone Branch, stepped forward with anger in his voice. "This woman's people have taken our land," Stone Branch said. "They have broken promises and spilled blood." His gaze moved to Mary, sharp and accusing. "And now one of them sits in our camp as if she belongs." Mary felt her knees weaken, though Lone Hawk remained steady beside her before Stone Branch could continue. Willow Mother stepped forward calmly. "She is a mother," she said. "And the child was born with no weapon in his hand." Some nodded at her words. Others looked away. Stone Branch was not convinced. "We cannot shelter every outsider who appears at our border," he growled. Lone Hawk took a step forward, placing himself directly between Mary and the elders. "I did not bring every outsider," he said. "I brought her." He let the words settle like stones falling into still water. Whispers rippled through the tribe. Running Wolf glared. "You risk all of us for one woman." Lone Hawk's eyes hardened. "I risk myself," he said. "Not the tribe, but—" Stone Branch pointed at Mary with anger. "Her enemies will come," he said. "They may already be near." Mary's heart twisted in fear. She had prayed the outlaws would never find her again. But the sharp way Stone Branch spoke told her the truth she had tried to ignore. Danger wasn't gone. It was following her like a shadow. Gray Bear stepped closer to Lone Hawk. "You have always served this tribe with loyalty," he said. "You have hunted for us, fought for us, and defended us." Lone Hawk bowed his head slightly. Gray Bear continued. "But today you ask us to trust your judgment in something beyond our traditions." Lone Hawk met the elder's gaze without fear. "I ask for nothing," he said quietly, "but I will give everything." Gray Bear frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" he asked. The camp grew silent as Lone Hawk drew in a slow breath. Then his voice carried across the clearing. "I claim Mary and her child under my protection." The words struck the tribe like a sudden storm. Gasps echoed, warriors stepped back, and Stone Branch shouted. "You bind yourself to her," he growled. "You bring a white woman into our circle." Lone Hawk didn't flinch. "That is my choice," he said. "My responsibility." Gray Bear looked deeply troubled. "This decision will shape your life," he warned. Lone Hawk nodded once. "I accept that," he said. Then he added, "But no man will touch her while I live." His words were not loud, but they were final, strong enough to steady Mary even as her heart raced. The baby stirred in her arms, a soft breath, a weak sound, but alive. And she realized what Lone Hawk had done. He had placed himself between her and the entire world. Between danger and safety, between rejection and hope. He had chosen to protect her, not because she asked, not because she belonged, but because he believed her life and her child's were worth defending. And in that moment, the tribe understood something new. Lone Hawk was no longer just a warrior. He had become a shield. And the decision he made today would change not only their lives, but the future of the entire valley. The tension in the camp hung like heavy mist long after Lone Hawk made his declaration. Mary stood frozen, clutching her baby, unsure if she should breathe or run. The tribe whispered among themselves, shocked by the warrior's bold claim. Some faces showed anger, others confusion, and a few held quiet curiosity, but no one dared challenge him openly. Lone Hawk stepped closer to Mary, his voice low and steady. "You are under my protection now," he said. Mary's lips trembled, and she whispered, "Why would you risk so much for me?" Lone Hawk didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at her baby, then back at her. His eyes calm but filled with unspoken meaning before he could speak. A loud shout came from the edge of the village. A young scout ran in, breathless and alarmed. "Riders!" he cried. 5 men approaching from the west. Mary felt the world drop beneath her feet. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the rest. Lone Hawk turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Outlaws," he muttered. "They have followed her scent." Mary pressed her baby closer. Fear gripping every part of her, she could already imagine the men's cruel faces. Their weapons, their hatred, the memory of her burning cabin flashed before her. Warriors grabbed spears and bows, forming a protective line around the clearing, but Mary could see the tension in their stance. Some did not want to defend her, some believed she brought this danger on them, and in their eyes she saw fear mixed with resentment. Gray Bear raised his staff, calling the tribe to stillness. "Stand your ground," he ordered. The camp grew quiet, waiting for the riders to arrive within minutes. The outlaws emerged through the tree line, their horses muddy from the long trail, their faces twisted with anger and hunger. The leader, a tall man with a cruel grin, rode forward. His eyes scanned the clearing until they found Mary. "There you are," he snarled. "You thought you could hide behind savages?" Mary flinched at the word, but Lone Hawk stepped in front of her. Blocking the man's view, his presence felt like a wall of stone. Gray Bear stepped forward cautiously. "You come into our land uninvited," he said. The outlaw laughed harshly. "We didn't come for you," he said. "Just the woman and her brat." Mary's heart twisted painfully. The outlaw pointed at Mary with a smirk. "She belongs to us," he said. "Hand her over, and we will leave your filthy camp in peace." The insult sparked anger among a few warriors, but others looked uncertain. Stone Branch glared at Lone Hawk as if waiting for him to break under pressure. Lone Hawk didn't move. "She is under my protection," he said, his voice steady like a grounded river stone. His words carried across the clearing with the weight of steel. The outlaw snorted. "What does that even mean?" He mocked. Lone Hawk's jaw tightened. "It means you must go through me to reach her," he said. The outlaws looked at each other, realizing Lone Hawk wasn't bluffing. The leader spat into the snow and sneered. "You're willing to die for a white woman?" Lone Hawk took a step forward. "No," he said quietly. "I'm willing to kill for her." The clearing fell silent, the air thick with disbelief and fear. Even Mary stared at him. Stunned by the certainty in his voice, he was no longer just protecting her out of duty. Something deeper tied him to his choice now. The outlaw leader pulled his gun. Before he could aim, a dozen Apache bows rose. Arrows pointed at his chest. Gray Bear's voice boomed, "Leave our land, or none of you will see another sunrise." The outlaws hesitated, then slowly backed away. The leader cursed under his breath but knew he was outnumbered. As they retreated into the forest, Mary collapsed to her knees, shaking. Her baby whimpered at the sudden movement. Lone Hawk knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "They will not return," he said softly. Mary looked at him with tears filling her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Lone Hawk's expression softened. "Yes," he said. "I did." For the first time, Mary saw past his strong exterior. She saw a man who had lost people before, a man who refused to lose someone again, not if he could save them. Gray Bear approached them slowly. "The tribe needed to see your heart today," he told Lone Hawk. "And now they have." The elder looked at Mary and her child. "You may stay," he said. Mary gasped, relief flooding her. Lone Hawk bowed his head in respect. The tribe members looked at one another, slowly accepting the decision. Some nodded at Mary, others still hesitated, but none stepped forward with anger anymore. Mary held her baby close, realizing something powerful. The unthinkable thing Lone Hawk did was not violence or rage or defiance. It was choosing her when he had every reason not to. It was protecting a woman his people were told to distrust. Protecting a child who owed him nothing. It was giving her a home when she had none left, and giving her a future she'd never expected to see again as the sun set behind the mountains. Mary looked at Lone Hawk with a soft, grateful smile, and for the first time since her world burned, She believed that the next sunrise might bring hope. Not fear, because she was no longer alone. She had a protector, a tribe, and a chance to start a new life. All because one warrior made an unthinkable choice.